This is episode 82 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. This and every week we'll be talking to you about public policy issues facing New Mexico. Wally, there's only a few days left in the signing session for Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, but not surprisingly, pretty much everything that the Rio Grande Foundation saw that was bad coming out of the legislative session is being signed by the governor. And this week in particular, SB 2, the revision up to $110 million from the only quote unquote $50 million in film subsidies, that was signed by the governor, as was SB 437, which takes New Mexico's minimum wage rate to $12 an hour by 2023. So the big four, those being the Energy Transition Act, the ban on right to work, and now the film subsidies and minimum wage, have all been signed. Those were the big bills that the Rio Grande Foundation watched with some degree of horror during the 2019 session, and we're not surprised because they were all items that Governor Lujan Grisham said she wanted to have happen before the session. So we knew going in this wasn't going to be good, and we were right.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, we were talking a little bit before, Paul, I don't believe she has vetoed anything, and it looks like she may not. I mean, there's maybe a bill or two out there that there's some maybe technical problems. I've been hearing little rumblings, but none of the big things. They're all either signed, have been, or likely will be.
Well, the only one that I would put out there that we did an entire podcast, or at least most of a podcast relating to, was the national popular vote, or New Mexico's efforts, if you will, at least the legislature's efforts to do an end run around the electoral college for presidential elections. She did sign the same-day voter registration bill, which we find equally problematic, although we don't proclaim to be experts on the subject area of elections and governance and how those things are done, but we just can't imagine a government that's so incompetent at so many things is going to be able to accurately take the names of people who want to register to vote on the very same day they cast the ballot. It's just a recipe for chaos. But she signed that one. We shall see. I think the one bill that I've heard that she may have some heartburn over is national popular vote. And she's got until April 5th, this Friday, to make that decision.
Yes, and the national popular vote, while it is a popular progressive cause right now, over the long term or maybe even the short term could turn around and be very ugly for a state like New Mexico. So I am hoping she won't sign that, but we will have to wait and see. That really does a whole lot of damage to our Constitution. And I think more importantly, as a New Mexican, reduces our political power as a state.
Yeah, that's the thing is, it's one thing to sing from the progressive political manual or the songbook, but it's another thing to enact policies that directly harm New Mexico and its impact. And you could argue that, hey, we talk about what's the impact of the film industry on New Mexico's tourism. I would say that at least as costly to New Mexico's economy would be going to the national popular vote, simply because all of those advertisers that pay the gross receipts tax on ads on the radio and TV, they will vanish into thin air, at least when it comes to presidential elections. But we'll keep an eye on that one, and next week we'll be past the deadline and we'll know more about what the governor has done with the rest of the bills and if she's brought out the veto pen on anything of significance. Of course, Wally, Albuquerque was in the national news once again this week. The dreaded ART bus made its way into the Wall Street Journal's editorial pages. Headline: Albuquerque's electric bus takes a wrong turn. Way to use Bugs Bunny reference, an obscure reference in a Wall Street Journal headline, and goes nowhere. So Albuquerque's electric bus takes a wrong turn and goes nowhere. Stephen Ford is the author. It was on March 29th, so just a few days ago. And he is a former speechwriter for Vice President Pence, and I guess has pretty good access to the Journal's editorial pages because, quite honestly, nothing being said in this article is really earth-shattering. It does a capable job of recapping the disaster that is Albuquerque Rapid Transit. But, it's always fun when Albuquerque and New Mexico in general get exposed to the national spotlight, and very rarely is it in a positive light, unfortunately.
Yes, and there are various levels of the national media, but it's tough to argue that the Wall Street Journal is not one of the leading ones. People who are very important, very influential, the most powerful and probably smart in the country tend to read the Wall Street Journal. And so this is just another one, and at least that it did put the art project in context that we're equally bad with other projects that are done in California, New York, and other places. So I guess our goal is to be like the big guys, and we now are. We have just as bad of projects as they do.
Yeah, and there was a recent news story relating to the ART from right here where it said that the Keller administration was going to wait until all the buses were received, which puts us in the middle of 2020. It just keeps being pushed back, and I keep asking or wondering, I think there needs to be a wager between Richard Branson and Tim Keller over, does somebody launch to space in a paid vessel, Justin Timberlake or whoever, or does someone take a ride on the ART system first? I think bets may be the order of the week, and I guess with March Madness going on, there's people are betting a lot, but I just that's a bet that I think is very intriguing to see what will happen first.
I have a similar bet with regard to the spaceport, and I have a bet with a person as to whether a drag race or a space launch will occur there first in terms of manned. There's some unmanned, and that's a way different ball game. But yes, there's these projects have their problems, shall we say. Yeah,
and nothing, again, earth-shattering. It is worth noting, of course, there was a lot of local opposition to the ART that's really glossed over in the article. And also, one of the things that's a pet peeve of mine about the way reporters in general, no matter their ideology, report on these issues is they almost attribute godlike powers to the executive, whoever they may be. And they gloss over the fact that city councilors or Congress in a different context have a lot of power over these issues. And, while R.J. Berry, or Art J. Berry, as some have called him, is no longer the mayor of Albuquerque and Tim Keller is, there are city councilors who will be up for election in the not too distant future who firmly and vocally, vociferously supported and continue to support the ART bus boondoggle, and voters need to be made aware of that. They need to be engaged, and hopefully they need to kick the bums out because the fact is that they should have known better.
Well, in your point about reporters glossing over, in episode 81 of Tipping Point, New Mexico, you visit with Mark Mathis, who wrote a book, Feeding the Media Beast. And one of the things in that book is that reporters don't know a lot about technical things. And it is always easy to cite a legislator or an executive, be it a mayor or a governor, and take what they say as gospel and don't even know where to look for the other side of the story or the other side of the issue. And I think there is a lot of that goes on with the ART, with the rail runner, with the spaceport. Are there any other problems, projects on a par with those three? I think those are the big three anyway.
Yeah, those are the big three boondoggles of New Mexico. They can create a Mount Rushmore maybe when the spaceport is no longer in use. Just put representations of those three projects up somewhere. The supercomputer under Richardson was a pretty big deal, but we know that by this time the supercomputer would have been completely useless no matter what. It just was useless before its time, and that was a total boondoggle. But that's getting back their ways now. As if the session ending in Santa Fe and the governor signing all of these bad bills is not enough. Speaking of city councilors that were on the council and supported ART, Mr. Pat Davis, city councilor, is also out front publicly. Isaac Benton, another one, also a supporter of ART, also a supporter of the revised or updated plastic bag ban. They had a town hall. No way to spend a Sunday afternoon when awesome college basketball games are on. I can't think of a worse way to spend a Sunday afternoon than listening to Pat Davis and Isaac Benton prattle on about plastic bags and why we should ban them and be more nanny state than we already are. But that's exactly what they did. So while Michigan State was upsetting Duke, which is an amazing team, amazing game, you could have been or should have been listening to Isaac Benton and Pat Davis tell us about how we're morally failing because we're using plastic bags and plastic silverware, plasticware, and all kinds of things that are naughty, and they're going to try to ban them on April the 15th, a momentous day normally for other reasons. In this case, it's normally tax day. But, Wally?
Well, this progressive push for banning plastic is much like the movie Elf. You get on the progressive naughty list if you don't have one of these. Now, as you've talked and I've seen writings on Errors of Enchantment, it's not clear that these bans are doing anything for the environment. You know, we acknowledge there's a problem with plastics going to the ocean. Getting rid of plastic bags at restaurants in New Mexico is likely not going to impact that. And I've done some research where most of that does not come from North America. Mm-hmm. It is from Asia, and Africa is where those plastics are going into the ocean. So, it just is one of those things. It just seems like chipping away at freedoms with the idea that government can make more and more and more of these decisions. Not good from a freedom point of view. And pragmatically, if any of these things tended to work out well, where these nanny state issues, where, if you, when the government gets involved, if things actually did improve or we made progress, it would be a different story. But, another related topic, I think that recycling programs are in big trouble because they've been fudging the numbers for a long time. They've been heavily subsidized, and now China tends to not want to take as much of our recycled raw material. And so those are looking like they're not nearly as cost efficient, effective, and maybe even environmentally friendly because you're driving trucks through neighborhoods time after time after time to pick up quote unquote recyclables. So it's just another example of that. And I do think that this is a problem or this is a solution looking for a problem. And I don't think it's going to be helpful, but that doesn't mean that the city council won't put it in place if left to their own devices.
Yeah, well, you make a very good point about the plastic issue and recycling, and those are challenges. I first want to mention that according to the World Economic Forum, this is a very credible entity, 90% of the plastic polluting our oceans comes from just 10 rivers. 8 of those 10 rivers are in Asia. 2 of them are in Africa. that means that 0 of them are in the United States or even North America.
And none of them are in New Mexico, particularly
Guaranteed that none of them are in New Mexico. So it is worth, I think, analyzing some of these numbers and data, but also, and I think you can make a mixed argument for either side on the recycling issue. I recycle. I am a believer in market signals and the fact that you should, in general, respond based on the market forces. And if somebody's willing to buy something for you and from you, and you can sell your old aluminum cans to somebody and get real money, you may not think your time and effort are worth it to collect those cans, store them, and then take them to a recycling center. But there is no doubt that aluminum has a market, whether the milk jugs, the plastic bottles, the newspapers, and so many of the other things that go into the recycling around here. And as you say, driving around those big heavy trucks, dumping them in there. And then are they really going back, to take this out of the trash supply, or is this something, or trash system, the trash stream is what I'm going for. Is that something that is actually happening, or are these ultimately just winding up in the landfill with everything else?
Well, when I had the privilege and honor of working in Santa Fe, so I got to see, even though I lived in Albuquerque, seeing their politics firsthand, and they were having people sort glass and recycling that. Only the problem was there was no market for it. They didn't have an outlet for it, so they were basically providing special delivery service for glass to the landfill when they could have just put it in the trash and sent it there. So with the idea that, well, surely someday someone will figure something out. And so that's the sort of thing that this plastic ban sort of gives me the feel that maybe this isn't as thought through. And it is interesting, the event on Sunday, there was much discussion about how it really wasn't going to cost more. And that is also something that government is very good at telling business, industry, and consumers that it's not going to cost you anymore. You can trust us. We know.
Yeah, no doubt. And, unfortunately, but obviously, this got pushed past the session. We welcome that because it's so difficult for people in public policy to track bad legislation in the state house and the state level, and then have to deal with it at the city level. We do have 4 city councilors who have publicly endorsed this plan. We'll see if they have a 5th. I don't see any real changes having been made to the proposal, but maybe something will happen by April the 15th. But either way, we encourage folks to engage, get in touch with your city councilors, and by all means, come out to the meeting on April 15th at City Council and tell them that they are being dumb with their public policy and it's a bad idea.
Yeah, and, it should need to be said, but I will say it because people lose track. That doesn't mean we're not for the environment. That doesn't mean we don't, that we advocate waste. That doesn't mean that we're lovers of plastic over all things. But, in a free society, in an economy as complicated and as robust as ours in the United States, it's amazing how well the market tends to work things out, like whether you should use paper or plastic, as opposed to how poorly the history at least been when bureaucrats, legislators make these decisions.
Well, the market does a great job of squeezing out unnecessary expenses. That is the definition of efficiency. And yeah, not always is cost efficiency the same as environmental efficiency, but very often the things driving costs within a product are being driven out by innovators in those fields trying to use, for example, the plastic bottles that we all see with our water in them used to be rather thick and robust. And now those bottles often will barely stand up if they don't have the water inside them. And because you're limiting the plastic that's actually used in those, and that's a form of efficiency.
Yeah, and along that same point, I'm undergoing a study. I will not call it proven yet, but I believe that the cases of plastic bottles, I've noticed that the ones that are on the outside in a case of 45 are actually ever so slightly thicker than the ones on the inside, and so they've gone above and beyond. So yes, the market wants to reduce the use of materials to the extent possible, just because it saves money, it makes more profit, better for the environment.
Exactly. And speaking of profits and losses, and especially efficiency and market signals, there was a great article in the paper, and I rarely, will cite a specific article in the paper, but Albuquerque Journal, zero carbon mandate will cost New Mexico citizens, by a Mike Nasi, Nasi, of the Life Powered Initiative. And basically he just eviscerates the Energy Transition Act and talks about the costs of wind and solar subsidies over in Germany and other states and even cities where they've had these mandates, and how ineffectual and misguided they are. I would really encourage folks to take a look at this article. It really debunks the entire Energy Transition Act, which, again, we've said is the most harmful bill passed this session, now signed into law. But unfortunately, this wasn't passed beforehand. I don't think it would have made any difference, but it's good to have this out there.
Yeah, and I don't think this is a fantastic article. I've heard many, if not most of these points at some committee hearing on Senate Bill 489. And so I'm with you. I don't think it would have made a difference. I do think it is time to potentially put a clock on the Rio Grande Foundation's website, starting at 0 from the time that Senate Bill 49 was signed, until that thing will have to be modified and changed, because it is so expensive and so unworkable. And it's a la bringing the Green New Deal to New Mexico early, before the feds even have a chance to mess that up at a national level.
It's worth noting that last week on the podcast offered a bet, a wager, if you will, to the folks at 350.org, one of the most radical environmental groups and endorsers of this legislation.
What was that bet, Paul? Tell us.
The bet was that retail electricity prices offered by PNM would, by the end of 2025, so basically halfway through the renewable mandate being implemented, that the rates PNM was selling electricity for, or we were buying electricity for, would be up more. They would rise more than the consumer price index would rise over that time. So essentially, I'm giving the environmentalists the benefit of the doubt on inflation. That's all great. You can say, oh, well, natural gas or wind and solar are all getting cheaper. Well, I'm giving you inflation right there. But unfortunately, they did not take me up on the offer. I would have gladly put, if I was wrong, Rio Grande Foundation was wrong, we would have put up on our website statements and put out tweets and Facebook messages and whatever the next generation is, MySpace Part 2, whatever social media, we would have been required to, for a full week, put out messages saying, Rio Grande Foundation is wrong about the impact of renewables on the electric grid and on electricity prices. We apologize to the citizens of New Mexico. And they would have had to do the same thing if prices rose by more than the rate of inflation. So if electricity prices rise faster, then 350.org would have to apologize to the public. If they rose slower, we would have had to apologize. That was not taken up by the 350.org folks.
Would you still consider a late application at this point, or have you closed the window on this particular wager, Mr. Guessing?
My dream is that Senator Jacob Candelaria or Nathan Small, state representative, two of the people who really pushed this legislation, that they would do something and jump on this bet. I don't know if we could agree on something. They're both, I believe, on social media. I know Jacob Candelaria is. But yeah, we would gladly take a bet. We've got really until next year, 2020, before even that mandate has been fully implemented. So we're just waiting to see if anyone will come around and take that bet. And we've got some time. So folks, if you're in the environmental movement and you think that electricity prices are not going to be driven up by the Energy Transition Act, please give us a holler on social media, email, info@Rio Grande Foundation, whatever it might be.
Well, I will hold my breath for as long as I can until that happens.
You got it, Wally. I'm sure that they are chomping at the bit for that because deep down they know. All right. Speaking of yet another boondoggle, and this one is in the budget, potentially a rail spur from the Rail Runner tracks, the existing tracks that run north and south through Albuquerque. There is money in the state budget, $7.5 million, to study whether to add a spur to Balloon Fiesta Park so that now we can take one of the boondoggles of New Mexico to a non-boondoggle, which is the Balloon Fiesta, one of the greatest events anywhere in the world. And it's so senseless, Wally, to try to shoehorn the Rail Runner into this kind of role. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, it's incredible that the $7.5 million is just a study. And there are 9 days a year where there is a distinct problem. But, we've talked and you've talked and many have talked about where do trains make sense? They make sense where you have big population centers moving lots of people. Oh, yes. And this is important. 365 days a year, not 9 days a year. So even if it would work fantastically from an engineering point of view, the 9 days, there will be almost unlimited alternatives that would be as effective, that would be more cost effective than throwing the Rail Runner into that role.
Right. Well, 7 of those 9 days, there's a requirement that you have a morning commute. You or 5 of those 9 days.
5 of the 9.
A morning commute, and that would be a problem because unless you just have random train sets and track space during rush hour that you're able to free up and get those to the Balloon Fiesta Park and make everything work, that is a problem right there. Of course, I have been to Rail Runner stations like Journal Center, for example, but even I drive by the Montano Rail Runner station a lot, and there are extra parking spots available on any given weekday morning, but the throngs of population that you're dealing with to get to Balloon Fiesta Park wouldn't work. You would just be transferring the massive traffic jams to the stations that are ill-equipped to deal with that. So it's my view, and I wrote this in a blog posting at airsoфenchantment.com. What should be done is that the money should be invested in figuring out a way to make the bus ride to the Balloon Fiesta Park make sense so that folks can go to a mall parking lot, Coronado, or Cottonwood on the west side, get a bus that's going to be there ready to go as soon as everybody gets on, and then move swiftly over limited or get the access to fast moving lanes so that there are no issues getting people to the Balloon Fiesta Park. I know a lot of folks, and I've been to the Balloon Fiesta. I know how the traffic can be in the morning, especially. Folks would love to take that bus over, but they've been let down too many times, and there's articles to prove it, by the inadequate management and the process there with those buses.
Yeah, and it is interesting. What they're studying would be the worst of the Rail Runner and the ART put into one big project. And you bring up, I do think, what the fatal flaw is. Those Rail Runner stations do not have parking capability. So unless you're going to extend the railroad tracks to places like Cottonwood Mall and Winrock and Coronado and UNM Arena, Lobo Football Stadium. There's no way.
Don't give them any ideas, Wally.
They might do it.
Don't give them any ideas. All right. Well, I spent last week at least a day up in Los Alamos. We have our new member of the board of directors of the foundation, Lisa Shen, who ran for the legislature. Really great lady and very engaged with the foundation. We put on an informal brown bag luncheon where people brought their own food and had a get together. And for an hour, I regaled them about the session and all the bills that had passed and all the issues that were taking place up in Santa Fe. And it was probably 40 or 45 folks that showed up. Too big for the room. They were hanging out in the halls trying to just hear nuggets of wisdom, hopefully. And it was a great event. Los Alamos, though, was uniquely impacted by this session. And I sat down and talked to one of their media outlets up there about the specific bill to tax the newly nonprofit and the contractors that manage the labs come and go, and sometimes there are for-profit, some of them are nonprofit, but nonprofits haven't had to pay the taxes on the gross receipts the same way as have the for-profits. And folks in Los Alamos, at least most of them, and folks in the state wanted to get their hands on that money, said to be about as much as $20 million, impacting the county of Los Alamos. And it's nice to have what you consider free money flowing in, but I just am concerned, question that the federal government, as price insensitive as it may be, is eventually going to look at New Mexico and say, we can do these things in other places. We don't need these facilities in this state, and we are very uniquely blessed to have two national labs right here in New Mexico, Los Alamos and Sandia. And I just, no other state has the kind of tax system that enables them to go and grab money from the federal government, essentially. I think we're playing with fire, and Michelle Lujan Grisham is signing this bill that's going to, that was vetoed by Governor Martinez. So this happened last session too. And it's trouble. It just is a bad deal that we are going after specifically the federal government and its infinite capacity to spend money. And I think we need to be a little more judicious, but that's not the mindset that we had in Santa Fe this session. It was, how can we get as much money as possible, and how can we spend as much money as possible?
Well, and there are many national labs across our great nation that are alternatives for many projects. And so, yes, the government could move things elsewhere. Another issue having to do with that is we'll talk a little bit, probably a little later in this podcast, is we will have a new senator with Senator Udall retiring. They always said that government spending would go down in New Mexico when Domenici and Bingaman were gone. Well, we're now into even further with more junior representation. And so, yes, I don't think it's necessarily wise fiscal policy, wise strategically, to basically play chicken about how much we can try to get out of the federal government to do federal spending here in New Mexico.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I was going to bring up Senator Udall next. So right away here, we can talk about Mr. Udall. Of course, New Mexico lost much of its pull in Washington, D.C. when in a quick succession in the early part of this decade, Senator Pete Domenici and Jeff Bingaman both retired. Those two were very effective, for better or for worse, at bringing home the bacon, especially on the Energy Committee, to New Mexico. And, there's no replacing that. It takes decades. Udall was the most tenured member of the U.S. Senate from New Mexico. He'll now, no matter what, be replaced by a freshman senator. And the beat goes on. We lose more of our seniority. And I just don't see us ever getting people of the stature of Domenici or Bingham into those positions of power. Now, Udall he's in his second term. He's going to be filling that second term out. The Democrats, we have two female U.S. members of Congress, but they're just brand new, Deb Haaland and Xochitl Torres Small. And so we have one kind of who's been there for a few years, and that is Lujan, Ben-Ray Lujan. He is already in the race and having reached pretty high levels in the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives up in Washington. Ben-Ray Lujan is going to be a formidable foe. I really don't see, with Hector Balderas having already said he's not going to run for that seat, I don't see any other Democrat really seriously challenging Ben-Ray Lujan.
I agree with you. I've come up with a slogan for the Democratic side. It's a new day with Ben Ray. I don't think there's going to be any significant challenge on the Democratic side. We might see some, single issue fringe type of candidate, but, Maggie Toulouse Oliver was, talked about odds of that being successful, much less being a good challenger for him, probably slim and none. And then anywhere from a 10 cent to $1 million question, depending on what the result is can the R's come up with somebody that can run a convincing and reasonable campaign against him, as opposed to just we've had some Senate races in the not too distant past that were not the strongest and didn't even make the D's work to gain a statewide seat.
And the obvious big question for the Republicans is, can they convince Governor Martinez to run for that seat? Susana Martinez would be a formidable candidate for that office against Ben-Ray Lujan. And, of course, the former Lieutenant Governor John Sanchez would be another person who could be a real competitor for the GOP side. I suspect Congressman Pierce, or former Congressman Pierce, not going to leave his post so quickly at the Republican Party. He's also lost 2 statewide races. That would be unlikely to work out well. Mick Rich seems to be jumping in, but people weren't very happy with him in the last race. There's other folks who might consider running for the U.S. Senate from New Mexico as a Republican, but it is a high bar and a tough slog, and it's really going to be, I think, between Governor Martinez and Lieutenant Governor John Sanchez to see if either of those two are willing to jump in the race.
Yeah, when you Martinez and Sanchez and Pierce, oh my, I have heard no one else talked about seriously. I have certainly had Mick Rich, but yes, for whatever reason, the folks that I have been visiting with don't have a lot of enthusiasm, and I really haven't heard any other names seriously even bantered about, which is interesting in and of itself. With the open seat, sometimes there's lots of people that want to be a U.S. senator.
Well, there's a lot of Republicans who got their BUTTs handed to them in 2018, and it's a little tough to jump back around and get into a race, especially a very expensive, very formidable opponent with Ben-Ray Lujan. It's going to be a real challenge for the GOP in 2020 to have a strong showing against him, because, of course, Trump is going to be up on the ballot. The Senate in New Mexico, the state Senate, it's really going to be all the marbles if we have another blue wave, blue tsunami. The Republicans, I don't really know what they're going to do next. Maybe they can declare minor party status alongside the Libertarians, but it's going to be very difficult if some of the same things that happened in 2020 happen like they did in 2018. It'll be very, very rough. So,
yeah. And you know what? A year from now, a year and a half from now, it's a long time until the election happens. But right now, with Trump's popularity or lack thereof in New Mexico, profound compared to surrounding states, with the Republicans really licking their wounds from the most recent election. This is potentially the Republicans' darkest hour here in New Mexico, although this next election could prove again that that may not be the case. But right now, it is not looking real good as the retirement of Udall is announced.
it can always get darker in New Mexico politics, unfortunately. Something I want to mention that happened this week, Sitel pulling up stakes here in Albuquerque. They are, I think, closing their call center, their whole facility, laying off 750 folks. It's always difficult when businesses, and we at the Rio Grande Foundation try to be good economists and clear in our thoughts, understanding that normally businesses don't make decisions on where to invest or build facilities based on one public policy decision or one issue. They look very robustly, but they do look on the margins. And people who talk about minimum wages may not necessarily be fully aware of the way that businesses look and make these decisions, and they may make a decision now, say, based on a policy that won't be fully implemented until 2023. Now, I don't know if the folks at Sitel decided that the minimum wage debate was not going in their direction, but I do know that this is a company that is involved in call centers and working with relatively low-paid folks to answer phone calls to help businesses deal with all kinds of issues. And I went on Sitel's website. You can go into their jobs descriptions and find basically their employees starting out competitive wages. They say $10 to $13 an hour. Now, folks will rightly be aware that Albuquerque had Sitel already has an above market minimum wage, but with the state going up to $12 an hour, Wally, is there any doubt that the politicians here locally will want to keep ahead of that bell curve and say, we want to have our own Albuquerque area minimum wage, which if you have that kind of discussion going on, businesses do not wait around for bad policies to bite them. They can go wherever they want to, especially call centers. I mean, you got to just, you get a warehouse and you put a bunch of phone lines in them and boom, you've got folks ready to go with the call center. So I'm not saying it is related to the minimum wage discussion in Santa Fe, but you also can't say that it has nothing to do with the minimum wage discussion.
Well, and call centers are a very volatile industry, and this company may just have gotten into a bad place with its business. But as John Boyd discussed in Tipping Point, New Mexico, episode 30 of this very podcast, companies are very hesitant to tell states why they're leaving or why they don't come here, because it is not in their best interest to do so directly, because you never want to say never. They may want to come back here, and so they don't like to burn bridges on the way out. And so it is sometimes difficult to discern from individual companies why they're leaving, but when things like that happen, it certainly, if it does not for policymakers, it should bring to mind about, are these policies discouraging companies from coming to and staying in New Mexico?
Yeah, and if you're running one of these businesses and you look at a city, a state where the minimum wage is being discussed both locally and at the state level, and there's talk of raising it or it's being raised, you've got to get some, questions going in your own head about, well, is this something that's going to price us out of this market? And we know that this area, the state, has depended a lot of jobs at call centers have come through here, and it's been a big part of our economy and the jobs that are here, yes, they're not high-paying jobs, but you've got jobs that fit the workforce that we have here in New Mexico. And you just wonder if the policymakers are following this, care about it, and whether they might reconsider. But I haven't seen any desire to reconsider those policies. But 750 jobs leaving your biggest city should be a wake-up call, I think. And we'll see. Maybe someone will have the dirt on why Sitel chose to leave, but I think minimum wage has to be considered a part of that discussion.
No doubt about it that introspection on unintended consequences is not the strong suit of legislators in New Mexico or anywhere else for that matter. But yeah, at a minimum, it comes under the categories things that make you go,
Yes. And I'm going to have to up my game, Wally, on citing prior podcast episodes off the top of my head, because I am very impressed. That's 2 different mentions there where you've directed people back to previous podcasts. Now, Mark Mathis is relatively simple because that was just a week ago. But John Boyd, yes, he somebody we sat down with and talked because he's a site selector and an expert on why businesses come to various areas. And you said, what number was that?
That was episode 30.
And if I might say, that was one of our best interview podcasts because John Boyd is such a informative man who really knows his business. He's out of New Jersey, just somebody who has affection for New Mexico, wants this state to succeed, wants to bring big employers out to New Mexico any chance he can. But until we get our policy climate straightened out, he is going to just watch from the sidelines. And we got the last subject. We've got our third speaker of 2019, May the 8th, Dr. Larry Schweikert. That is Schweikart. Larry Schweikert came out to New Mexico last year. He did a speech for us in Albuquerque, and then we took him down to Las Cruces, also Roswell. And he's written a number of books on history and politics. But his newest book is Reagan, the American President. He told us he was in the process with that book, and now it is published. So folks can come out on May the 8th to the Marriott Pyramid. They have to sign up online, preferably at riograndefoundation.org, and they can hear Mr. Schweikert talk about Ronald Reagan and his new book and all the findings he's got in there. Reagan remains an iconic figure in American politics, certainly for the conservative movement.
No, Dr. Schweikert has a very engaging style of writing history. I encourage everyone to come out. Just a point of self-declaration. I am listening on an Audible audiobook to A Patriot's History of the United States, updated edition, 55 hours and 43 minutes of reading time, and I only have 21 hours left. I have learned so much. It's very engaging. He's very engaging, and I'm really looking forward to, I certainly hope I will be able to attend the event because I think it'll be a great one.
Yeah, tickets will be $30. They're on sale right now. Anytime folks want to go to riograndefoundation.org and sign up online, those do go up as you get towards the day of the event. And Dr. Schweikert will be bringing copies of his book, presumably other books as well, but definitely the new one about Ronald Reagan for signing and purchase. And yes, I agree. Dr. Schweikert is very funny on the stand and somebody who can really hold a room when he's talking about all manner of issues. Well, folks, we have reached the end of another exciting podcast. It was a busy week, as they so often are. We'll know the results of all of the governor's signing and or veto decisions, especially her whether she's going to sign the national popular vote bill. But yeah, it's not been pretty so far. She hasn't taken any stands that we thought weren't going to happen going in. And thanks for listening to this week's podcast. We're working every day to turn New Mexico around. Go to riograndefoundation.org for more information or to support our work.